Yesterday, I met my fiancée at our wedding venue for our scheduled 4 months out meeting to finalize the details for the big day. We each drove separately, as she was coming directly from work and planned to go somewhere afterward. During our meeting, she mentioned that a friend of hers needed a ride home and a dropping off a rental car. I didn't think anything of it and told her it was fine since this friend lived close to us, and I knew her fairly well. However, things took a strange turn later that night. After I got home, I tried calling and texting my fiancée for about 3 hours, but I couldn't reach her. After an hour and a half with no reply, I texted her friend, asking if my fiancée had made it safely. I was honestly starting to get worried. When my fiancée finally came home, she apologized for taking longer than expected, explaining that she'd hung out with her friend for a bit. I shrugged it off, but did ask her to let me know next time if it's going to take longer than planned. Then, not long after she came home, her friend replied to my text with a confusing response. "Sorry, I couldn't make it to the venue. You didn't see your fiancé tonight." That was the first alarm bell. When I asked my fiancée about this inconsistency, she seemed unbothered and said she had no control over what her friend might say. She even stepped outside right after our conversation, which only made me more suspicious. I know it's not like me to snoop, but I checked her phone records and saw that, as soon as she'd gone outside, she called her friend who had texted me. I also noticed another hour-long call with a number I didn't recognize from earlier that day, right as she was heading to the venue. At this point, I felt like I was in a fog of confusion and doubt. To ease my mind, I decided to give it another chance. So the next morning, I asked if I could see the text from her friend asking her to pick her up. I wanted to apologize for any misunderstanding, hoping I'd been overreacting. She refused to show me the text. I then mentioned that when I'd caught up with her on the way to the venue, she was on a call, so I asked her who it was with. She quickly said it was the friend she'd picked up later, but something didn't sit right. When I told her I'd seen her phone records and knew this wasn't true, she changed her story, now claiming she'd met a coworker named Jack to discuss a work-related issue that required an in-person demonstration. Things continued to escalate. I asked her to show me the texts with this coworker, but she refused. I kept pressing, asking if there was anything she needed to tell me, even suggesting that, if there were problems in our relationship, we should talk openly. After some hesitation, she launched into a list of complaints about me. I worked too much, didn't listen to her, and didn't give her enough attention. I was stunned, as none of these issues had been brought up before. At that moment, everything started to add up. After a lot of back and forth, she finally let me see her messages with Jack. What I read shook me to my core. The messages were explicitly flirtatious and even intimate, discussing their feelings for each other. They hadn't known each other long. She'd started this new job a month and a half ago, and this man was significantly older, divorced, and had multiple kids. I couldn't believe this was happening. I'd been supporting her financially, so she wouldn't have to take on a second job, and we were just months away from our wedding. I felt completely blindsided. Later that night, I sat down with her for one more talk, hoping for some kind of explanation. Instead, she tried to turn everything around, claiming her actions were my fault because I hadn't been a good enough listener, and I was often too busy working to make time for her. I tried to explain that I was working extra to provide for us, to keep her from needing another job, but it was clear she'd already made her decision. Now I'm left grappling with the pieces, wondering what to do next. Any advice would be greatly appreciated. She said that, in hindsight, she would have preferred getting a part-time job to avoid the financial pressures, which I found contradictory, since I was the one working long hours to help support her and prevent the need for extra work. She then tried to downplay her affair, saying it lasted only a week and they only kissed once, so she thought we could move past it. But when I brought up the texts, where she was not only speaking intimately with him, but also belittling me, she dodged the issue and refused to discuss it. I tried to make it clear that this entire situation was a result of her choices. I told her that if she had any problems, she could have come to me instead of crossing this line. This betrayal was her responsibility, and I could never fully trust her again. She tried to frame this as my fault, but I emphasized that her actions went too far. After our intense conversation, we were finally able to talk about the practical side of things. We decided we needed to figure out what to do with the house we owned together and our 3 dogs. We agreed that either I'd buy her out, or we'd sell the property and go our separate ways. As for the dogs, one of us would take one, and the other 2 would stay together. It's a tough reality, but at least we're starting to untangle things. Financially, I could handle the house on my own, but it's a large place, 3,000 square feet on 5 acres bought, specifically so she could have space for her horse. She plans to board her horse elsewhere once she moves out. It's a heartbreaking situation, and I'm unsure about keeping such a large space meant for our life together. On the 3rd day, we had another long conversation, lasting about 3 hours, where we dove into our relationship and how things had reached this point. She began by listing everything I supposedly did wrong, focusing on my lack of communication, spending too much time working, and being on my phone frequently. I acknowledged that I'm not perfect, and I took on extra work to support us and keep us financially stable. I run an e-commerce business and often handle customer service on my own, meaning I'm essentially on call 24/7. I admit I could have managed my time better and set boundaries to be more present with her, but I had assumed I was doing what was needed for our future. It hurt to hear that she'd felt distant, but had never voiced any concerns to me. She said she thought I'd be upset if she brought up her unhappiness, but I told her I would have appreciated the chance to make changes. I'm not perfect, and sometimes I might come across as insensitive, but my intentions were to help us both. For example, recently, I tried to help her set a budget, as she was struggling financially. Since I work in the financial field, I wanted to help her organize things, and I pointed out that she owed me around $1,000, not to make her feel guilty, but to show how much I'd been supporting her. She took it as a dig at her, which wasn't my intention. I just wanted to make sure we'd be okay, especially with wedding expenses coming up. Her insistence that my flaws justified her betrayal was difficult to hear. She even expressed surprise that I would consider ending our 7-year relationship over this. I had to remind her repeatedly that it wasn't me who jeopardized our relationship. She did, with her actions. She also accused me of telling too many people too soon about her infidelity, saying we could have worked it out privately. But from my perspective, her hiding her feelings and avoiding communication is what led us here. She also said that if I'd been a better listener, she wouldn't have sought companionship with someone else. After further probing, I learned that she'd started messaging this co-worker, Jack, just 1 or 2 weeks before everything came out. From the messages I read, he invited her to a park to play basketball, where they ended up making out. I believe her when she says it didn't go further than that, but I have no doubt that it would have if this had continued. She claims he's not her boyfriend, but she took off again tonight, and I have no idea where she went. She could be with him or with a friend. It's hard to say, and I don't know what to believe anymore. Living together is incredibly uncomfortable, and I'm hoping to resolve things quickly. I get the feeling that she wants to reconcile, but I can't ignore the broken trust and her refusal to take responsibility. In retrospect, the core issue might have been a long-standing lack of communication. Our lives had fallen into a predictable routine, with no acknowledgement of the underlying issues. Instead of discussing her unhappiness, she chose to seek someone else, lying to my face and speaking poorly of me behind my back. It's a painful realization, but I think I'm finally seeing the situation clearly. We both let communication slide, but her decision to act on it this way was a line that can't be uncrossed. Now, I'm left trying to pick up the pieces and wondering what's next. She has shown herself to be very sneaky, and I don't think I can ever fully trust her again. While moving on would be the simplest path, I doubt I could truly be happy staying with someone I can't trust. Understanding the root cause of this breakdown has at least given me some peace of mind, helping me see things from a new perspective and allowing me to address my own communication and personality issues. I've started going to the gym, establishing a daily routine, and I plan to resume studying for my designation soon. I also took this week off work to prioritize my mental health. Today, I officially called the wedding venue to cancel our date. While we were able to get a partial refund, we did lose some money, unless the venue manages to rebook the date for another couple. I also updated her parents on everything, as they live far away and must be worried. I assured them that everything is calm here, and they don't need to be anxious about their daughter's well-being. I looked into housing options, and with today's interest rates, finding a comparable house with the mortgage I currently pay is virtually impossible. Even finding an affordable apartment is challenging these days. So, my best option might be to try to buy out her share of the house and have her move into an apartment. She seems agreeable to this, and we plan to bring in an appraiser to assess the value and determine her share of the equity. If feasible, I'll pursue this path. For those reading this, I'd love to know, does this information change your perspective on my situation? Am I handling things the right way? Or is there something I should be doing differently? Updates. Nearly a month has passed since everything came to light, and it's been an incredibly emotional, busy, and eventful period. To be honest, in the days following the discovery, I was a bit of a mess, pathetically trying to salvage the relationship and begging to reconcile. Despite her betrayal, it's embarrassing to admit, but it was part of my process for moving on. During that vulnerable phase, I tried everything to make things right and fix what I could, but eventually, she told me she had to choose between him and me, and she chose him. That was my wake-up call. The moment I realized I'd let my self-worth slip and needed to shift focus to what's best for me. After 7 years of prioritizing her and her needs, it was time to start thinking about my own. I took immediate steps to regain control. I transferred our joint savings into my personal account, calculated what she was owed, and moved her half back to the joint account for her to access. I've been working out every day since this happened. It's not just about improving my appearance, but also keeping my mind clear. I've treated myself to a few new clothes, a massage, and outings with friends and family. In hindsight, this relationship isolated me from my loved ones, something I should have seen as a red flag. For the longest time, I rarely did anything for myself, always focused on supporting her and caring for our animals. Now, for the first time in my life, I'm seeing a therapist weekly. This has been incredibly helpful, not just in processing my feelings, but also in improving my decision-making. I intend to continue therapy, even after this situation is resolved, as part of my ongoing personal growth. As for the more practical matters, I'm still living in the house with my ex. She's moved into the guest room, and our communication is limited to necessities like feeding the dogs. I no longer try to reason with her. She insists on blaming me, labeling me as a poor communicator, and using that as an excuse for her own failure to communicate her feelings and ultimately cheat. It's clear she's unwilling to take accountability, so I stopped wasting energy trying to talk sense into her. We're moving forward with selling the house. I contacted a real estate agent, and after discussing a reasonable sale price, I set everything in motion. She requested I get opinions from 2 other agents, including one recommended by her friend. Despite feeling frustrated, I made all the necessary calls, scheduled appointments, and met with the agents just as I always did in our relationship. Eventually, we went with the first agent, and the house was listed last Sunday. Open house is scheduled for next Saturday, and there's already considerable interest. Regarding the dogs, one suggested taking one, or even none, if it meant they could stay together. She opted to take all 3, which is best for them and also lets me start fresh without conflict. She plans to move her host to a boarding facility once we finalize things. Unexpectedly, I met someone about a week ago. She's been through a similar experience, and we've been spending time together. I have no grand expectations, but it's refreshing to connect with a kind, thoughtful, and independent person. Talking with her has opened my eyes to what I'd been missing. Looking back, my ex was narcissistic, self-centered, dependent, and manipulative. I wish I'd listened to family and friends' warnings earlier, but I was stuck in a comfortable routine. Nice house, plenty of land, great pets. It seemed easier to just keep going. I don't see this as wasted time. Instead, I'm using it as a valuable learning experience. Moving forward, I won't ignore red flags, and I won't fall into the trap of settling for a life that doesn't make me truly happy. I'm committed to maintaining strong relationships with my friends and family, who have been invaluable throughout this journey. Update: I shared the house with my ex until mid-May, and those months were incredibly painful. Living with her and the dogs in what used to be our shared home felt like the life I knew had ended, and now we were simply uncomfortable roommates. We slept in separate rooms, and the dogs roamed freely between us at night, with both our doors open. Initially, she spent nights away, but eventually that stopped altogether. Although the endless texting and phone calls with Jack continued, I don't know if they ever decided to pursue a relationship or just remained friends. And frankly, I didn't care enough to ask. She finally moved out in mid-May, taking 2 of the 3 dogs with her. Saying goodbye to those dogs was heart-wrenching. It felt like losing loved ones. During my last month at the old house, I met up with her and the dogs at a park a couple of times. They remembered me and were thrilled to see me, but I could tell they were adjusting just fine without me, which brought some peace. My ex and I barely spoke, limiting our conversation to how the dogs were adapting. She moved to a small, run-down house in a rough neighborhood, where the dogs would have a yard, but it wasn't fenced in. Last I heard, she was working on building a fence. During that time, I dedicated myself to the gym, going every day, and focused hard on my side hustle. I knew my expenses would increase, so I wanted to be as prepared as possible. From March to mid-June, I generated 6 figures in sales through the side business, and by avoiding any big purchases, I saved a significant amount in addition to the proceeds from selling the old property. This put me in a strong financial position, allowing me to buy a nice house in a good area, complete with a yard for the dog that stayed with me. Selling the old house went smoothly, but buying the new one was a challenge. Fortunately, the buyers of my previous house allowed me to rent it back for a month, giving me time to finalize my move by June 15th. After making offers on 5 properties, I finally secured the last one in late May. Moving into a new space has been refreshing. Being out of the old house, where every corner held memories of my ex and our life together, felt like a weight lifted. It was especially empty after she left with the other dogs, but my friends and family rallied around to help me move, making it much easier. I've now been settled in the new house for a little over a month, and it's starting to feel like home more and more each day. I'm also still seeing the woman I met a while back, who is now my official girlfriend. Living closer to her has been a nice change, and she's been incredibly supportive and understanding about my need for space and emotional recovery. Her communication style has been eye-opening and has pushed me to become a better communicator as well. For the first time, I feel like I'm with someone who genuinely understands and respects me, and my emotional intelligence has grown significantly through this experience. Reflecting on it all, I can say that, as difficult as this was, I feel fortunate that things unfolded as they did. I nearly married someone who was entirely self-centered, ungrateful, and manipulative. I had grown so comfortable in a routine of work and caring for our animals that I was willing to sacrifice my own happiness. Now, I'm committed to working on myself, continuing to learn about my own needs, and giving my dog the best life possible. Thoughts of my ex do cross my mind occasionally, both the good and bad memories. My new therapist has been extremely helpful in helping me process these memories, and she's made me realize that I may never receive the apology or acknowledgement I once hoped for. My ex is simply too proud to admit any fault. Communication with her has been sparse, and I don't plan on seeing her or the other 2 dogs again. I've accepted that this is what's best for everyone,